Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our event on the IPCC report and the role of carbon capture and utilization, CCU, to mitigate climate change. So today we're going to have a wide range of scientists and speakers to present the different subjects related to CCU in the IPCC report. May I just ask to see the slides, because I don't see the slides, which is a little problem. Thank you very much. So here you see the agenda. So I will start with an introduction on the role of CCU in the IPCC report. Then we will continue with Dr. Deepak Pant on the state of the art of the CCU technology. So where do we stand today in terms of CCU technologies? Then we will continue on the role of CCU in the energy systems, and then speak on the role of CCU in the building sector, and then on the chemical industry. So how CO2 can be used as a feedstock there. Then we will have a first Q&A with this first panel. And then we will continue, have a coffee break, and I will present the second part later on. For the Q&A, you have the chance to ask your questions on our LinkedIn and on our Twitter. We have prepared a post, a special post for the Q&A, where you can just put your questions. You can just copy these two QR codes, and it will directly bring you to the links where you can ask the questions. I will show this QR code later, but if you just go on our social media, CO2 Value Europe, on LinkedIn and Twitter, you will find the post on the top to put your questions and potential comments as well. And I also invite the speakers and the different people to also answer questions directly on the social media. So let's start with the hard part of the subject. So carbon capture and utilization and its role to mitigate climate change. For the very first time, the IPCC has recognized CCU as a solution to mitigate climate change in the 6 assessment reports that has been published recently. So this report is in 3 working groups. So we have a first working group that was published in August last year, which really represents the physical basis on climate change. So what is happening now with our climate systems due to human-induced climate change. The second report that was published in February concerns the impacts of this climate change and also the vulnerability and the risk, and what are the measures that we need to implement to adapt to these risks. And the third report that has been published like a few weeks ago on climate change mitigation, so on the solutions. And it's in this third report that carbon capture and utilization is considered as a solutions amongst other solutions. So for those who do not know very well the IPCC, so it's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So it's an intergovernmental body of the United Nations, and it provides objective and comprehensive scientific information on human-induced climate change, including the natural, political, and economic impact and risks, and also the possible response options, the possible solutions. To give you some numbers, so the IPCC is composed of 195 member states. They sit in plenaries where all decisions are taken in consensus. So for example, about the outlines of the report, of the authors that are nominated, etc. And the first assessment report was published in 1990 already, so it's quite back in the time. And the main messages were relatively similar than the message we have today in this 6 assessment report, except that now the uncertainty is much lower, and the messages are also much stronger. In terms of this third working group on climate mitigation, there were more than 600 international authors from 65 countries that have contributed to this report. It's a report of more than 3,000 pages. And there were 18,000 scientific publications that have been assessed. So the authors are not doing research for the IPCC, they are really assessing all the research and scientific publications, especially peer-reviewed publications, and they bring them in the report. And in this 3,000 pages, there is also a summary for policymakers that is much shorter, and that is it's really a summary of the key messages dedicated to the policymakers, and a technical summary that is about 145 pages, that is also with the key messages, but in a more technical way. I really invite you to have a look there, because it's well explained and you have the key messages really summarized well. But there were also about 60,000 comments during the expert review. So this report was first published as a first draft, and there were a first review, and then the comments were implemented, and then there were a second release of the second draft. And then again, we could do an expert review on this. And together with the Scientific Advisory Committee of CO2 Value Europe, we have brought all the scientific literature related to CCU to the IPCC report. And we are very glad to see that this year, in this report, for the first time, CCU is covered there. So if we look at the general message of this third working group, it shows clearly that mitigation pathways exist to limit warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees, but this involves deep, rapid, and sustained emission reductions. So net zero greenhouse gas emissions is only possible through systemic climate mitigation actions and at all levels of the society. So I think this is really the key message of this report. And why do we always speak about this 1.5 degree or well below 2 degrees? It's because it is this at this temperature, or if we go above this temperature, that we have risk to reach tipping point where our climate system is going to become more and more uncontrolled, I would say, and where the life on Earth will be more and more degraded. So we will absolutely have to do everything we can to limit the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees, or at least well below 2 degrees, and every 10th of degrees counts there. So on the general message, so the good news is that it's clearly stated that solutions currently exist and in all sectors to at least halve greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, which is the ultimate goal. And solutions should be based on sobriety, but also on energy efficiency and on circularity of goods, waste, and resources. Action will cost a lot of money, but it will cost far less to act than not to act. And as early we start, less it will cost in money, but also in human life, in health issues, and in discomfort. In terms of solutions, they have also shown, and I think this is also for the first time that it's so clearly explained in the IPCC, that cooperation, partnerships, but also industrial symbiosis and intersectoral cooperation and coordinations are the keys to success. So we should not see solutions as one sectors, but when we speak about carbon neutrality, we should really think about intersectoral approach. There is enough capital globally to take the proper measures to mitigate climate change, but the money flows towards the transitions should be multiplied by 3 to 6. And one very clear message also that is that clear, I think also for the first time in an IPCC report, is that no more investment on fossil carbon infrastructure are compatible with reaching climate objectives. So it means that we have an urgent need for more low carbon energy sources, but also for alternative carbon feedstock, so alternative to fossil. So there is a growing interest, if we look at all the research and the different studies that have been published in circular carbon economy, wherein CO2 is converted into reusable materials. So this is especially relevant for the transitions of economies that are clearly dependent on fossil revenues. And it's also important when we think about becoming more sovereign in energy, especially with the different crises we are facing at the moment. So in this goal, carbon capture and utilizations play a very important part of the game. So carbon capture and utilization is a fact to capture CO2 or directly from the air or from the flue gas, and to convert the CO2 using renewable electricity into different types of materials. So we have building materials where CO2 can be stored permanently. We will discuss about it later on, but also the different power to X approach where CO2 can be converted into renewable chemicals and to renewable fuels. Here I've put the definitions of CCU from the IPCC glossary. So they insist on the fact that the climate effect of CCU depends on the product lifetime, the product it displays, and the CO2 sources. So if it's fossil, biomass or biogenic, or if it's coming from the atmosphere. I give 2 examples of CCU pathways. Here is on the CCO2 to renewable fuels and chemicals. So we can use renewable electricity and water and make electrolysis, so to break the water molecules into oxygen and hydrogen to create renewable hydrogen, which is by itself also a synthetic fuel. But as it's not easy to store, and we will discuss about that also later, we can make this hydrogen react with CO2 or from the air, from flue gas, to create a very wide range of products from renewable fuels and chemicals. This allows us to create renewable carbon feedstock to move away from fossil fuels. It's also allow us to facilitate renewable electricity, the uptake, the storage, and the transportations, especially the uptake in sectors that cannot use directly renewable electricity. And it allows to reduce CO2 emissions because we reuse this CO2 in the system to create fuels. Another example is the role of CO2 mineralization. So there we use industrial waste, construction waste, for example. So we have gigatons of it in Europe, which are rich in minerals, rich in energy. And we use CO2 that we dissolve in water to create calcium carbonate. And with this calcium carbonate, we can create a broad range of materials, of building materials, for example, aggregates. And we can also substitute some part of the cement in some type of building materials to decrease the carbon footprint of the product. So in that case, we have, we have here a carbonation plant. So in place, originally to create building material, we use natural resources from quarries, so rocks, and then we burn them, we emit a lot of CO2, and then we can create cement and then concrete and other type of materials, and then it goes to waste. So the idea is that we reduce this waste and we reduce also the amount of material we need from quarries to really create a circular pattern to produce building materials. So this will be discussed later on by Paola. So if we go back to the key statements on CCU from the IPCC report, here I will first present the opportunities that are presented. So the first statement is on the fact that CCU is a drop-in solutions with limited new infrastructure needs, especially when we speak about the production of CO2-based fuels and feedstock. But CCU is also has a large potential to decouple chemical production from fossil resources. So when we use CO2 as a renewable carbon feedstock in the chemical industry, for example, and there is a study from Kate Loan et al. That show that we could reach up to 3.5 gigaton of CO2 use equivalent in 2030. In terms of CCU technologies, some CCU technologies are already at the commercialization level, while others are still in the lab or in prototype or pilot phase. But this is moving very fast. A few years ago, it was really an emerging technology, but it's really moving very fast. And I think you will see that also in the coming presentations. And there are clearly strong interactive effects between the low carbon electrification, the switching to, for example, biomass and hydrogen, ammonia, but also to CO2-based fuels. So all these different subjects have to be considered all together. And CCU can provide CO2 removal, so CDR solutions, when atmospheric or biogenic CO2 is durably stored in products. So this is also a clear statement from the IPCC. If we look now at the challenges, one of them is that there might be a highly unpredictable competitions between fossil, biogenic, and direct air capture, so the different source of carbon to provide chemical feedstock, material, and fuel needs. So that shows that it's very important to know also how the demand on these different products will evolve. So it's important to also do market investigations and understand the market penetration of these products. And CCU has been envisioned as part of the circular economy, but there are also conflicting expectations, especially when CCU is mixed with CCS. And we are strongly advocating for the fact that CCU and CCS should be considered differently, especially when it comes to policy making, because the needs and the challenges for the two sectors are also quite different. And when they are mixed, it often makes that CCU becomes less considered. When we speak about risk perceptions and public acceptance on CCU, what is clear now is that the general public does not know much about CCU, so it's very hard to know what is the public acceptance on CCU. There is a bit more studies on CCS, and CCS, especially in Germany, there were several cases where CCS plants have been refused, so because of a problem of public acceptance. So this is a work also that will be discussed by Catherine at the end of this event. And there is also an important point is that when assessing CCU technologies and the role on mitigating climate change, we sometimes have a very diversified list of outputs, because the methods that are used to assess the mitigation potential of CCU are also very diverse, and they are also sometimes not constrained the same way or not constrained enough, because carbon capture and utilization, it's not one type of technology, it's a very large type of technologies, and the sector is very wide. So there is also a very high granularity. And this is one reason also why CCU is not taking into account at the moment in climate scenarios, because it's very hard to model it. So, but what is very clear is that to be sure that a specific CCU technology, but not only the technology, but also the whole context where it is used, so the whole system, it is very important to determine this impact by life cycle analysis and in a systematic way. And we will have a presentation from Andrea just after the coffee break on that subject. So for now, I thank you for your attention. And I remind you that you can go on our LinkedIn and on our Twitter to ask your questions. So you can just take a picture of these QR codes to ask questions. And then I will give you the floor to the first speaker of the day, Dr. Deepak Pant.
So slide transition and pointer. Yeah. Good afternoon from my side as well, and thank you, Celia, for a very nice overview of the IPCC report, as well as the role of CCU, that possible role CCU can have on it. If I can have my slides as well, then I will start immediately. Okay, so the topic I was given was where do we stand in terms of CCU technologies, and I did not dare to change it, so I just kept it like that. So I had no need to introduce the subject of CCU. Oh, these are still the old slides. Can you use the new ones that I send you? No problem.
You can introduce yourself.
Yes. Yeah. So my name is Deepak Pant, and I'm a senior researcher at VITO. VITO is the Flemish Institute for Technological Research, located in Belgium, almost 120 kilometers from here, close to the Dutch border, and works on all types of sustainable solutions, mainly divided into 5 different business units: sustainable materials, sustainable chemistry, energy, remote sensing, and health. So I belong to the unit of sustainable chemistry, and CCU is a very widely researched topic within VITO itself. So we are working also on mineralization. So my colleagues already have a company spin off a few years ago that is building bricks where the CO2 is stored for long-term usage. And those bricks are actually being used now currently in Belgium and in Netherlands to make footpaths and such structures. Whereas we are working mainly on electrochemical conversion of CO2. I have some examples in my slides that I will show you later. And we start from low TRL technologies. So starting from starting from 1 to 3 technology readiness level. That's how the European Commission defines the different states of technologies. And when you have an idea, you are at TRL 1 or 2. When you proof it in the lab, then you are at TRL 3. And as so on and so forth as you progress, and until you reach, the final goal is to reach TRL 9, when you have really commercialized the technology and you are selling the product in the market. So a lot of technologies that Celia also mentioned in the slide, I will say only a few of them are actually at TRL 9, whereas the rest are in this wide spectrum range of TRLs starting from 1 to 9. And now I will, I hope I have the right slides, correct. So this is the first slide that I wanted to introduce here, and then a lot of things that were mentioned are already there presented by Celia. So you can have 2 sources of CO2, as you can see here. You can have the point sources like an industry emitting the CO2 into the atmosphere that you can capture and convert it into fuels and chemicals. But you also have a lot of CO2 going into the atmosphere, which is already present there. And then you can have this as a source of carbon dioxide as well. You can take this either via direct air capture, as it is called. So people have developed technologies where the CO2, even if it's at a low ppm of 400 to 420 ppm in the atmosphere, you can still capture it selectively, and then you can have a pure source of CO2, which can be further converted into fuels or chemicals. Of course, naturally, this is being done by plants and via the process of photosynthesis. So, but that's not the subject today. And the other one is, of course, you establish a plant very close to the industry, and then you purify the CO2 from this mixed flue gas, and then use it for the further purposes. Then you can have also the time period of these products were mentioned. In terms of products, you can see a lot of them listed here, starting from fuels, polymers. Some of them are also available in the market. And then, of course, chemicals that can be used further for making other products in the industry. In terms of lifetime, some of them have a very short lifetime for a few days to few years, whereas others can be stored for over decades or even centuries. Now, if you go further, this can be further simplified into this way. So these are the main routes in which the CO2 can be converted into fuels or chemicals. The CCU process can be carried out. But the main difference I want to bring to here is the possibility to combine the conversion of CO2. CO2 is a very strong molecule. So you need a lot of energy to break the bonds between the carbon and the oxygen. And somehow you need to find this energy in a cheap and effective way. So some of the technologies that are mentioned here, for example, electrocatalysis, photocatalysis, allow you to use the renewable electricity, which is growing bigger and bigger in Europe, but also the rest of the world, and also becoming cheaper in the way. And then you can combine this renewable energy storage, RES, as the term is used, coupled to the CO2, CCU. And then you have a complete story of renewable energy storage coupled to the carbon dioxide capture and utilization. The concept itself is known as power to X. So power is the renewable power, and X is the product that you want, or the fuel or chemical that you want to make. But apart from that, you can also have the photosynthesis, but then this is a biological route. The mineralization will be discussed later by another speaker. And you also have the enzymatic catalysis as one of the options of CCU. Now, it was mentioned about also the renewable electricity. So if this graph from 2020 paper in EES shows very nicely how the number of installations of this is specifically for solar PV, as well as the concentrated solar power all over the globe. So the number of installation have grown drastically also in Asia and countries like China and India. And now the second aspect is the cost of the power. This power is getting cheaper and cheaper day by day. So at the moment we are at a very low threshold, so that if you have effective technology, and there are technologies and people are utilizing this at a very low cost in countries which are solar rich, let's say. And then what you can do is, when you have this power at a low cost, or in some cases free as well, then you can make a lot of molecules using this electricity. And these are the different molecules that are mentioned here. Some of them have also the number of electrons that you need to convert them from CO2 to that particular. So for example, formic acid is a 2 electron, whereas the others need even 8 or 12 electrons. So the more electrons you need, which means the more power you need to supply to the systems to convert them, make them from CO2, so to speak. Yeah. Then how do you decide which products you want to make? Because there is a plethora of products that can be made from CO2 as a starting material. In our organization, we use something called a value ratio, which is there is a economic formula behind this, but this is about the market value divided by the unavoidable cost. And then you can see the spectrum of the products listed on the x-axis and their value ratio here. Now, the interesting thing is you can have two types of products here. One, which have a very high economic value. For example, the oxalic acid is mentioned here, but it has a low market value. So if you want to, let's say, to put it in a very simple words, if you want to make a lot of money very quickly, probably you should go for this kind of product to make oxalic acid from CO2, because it has a very high value, but the market size is small, so you won't disturb the market as such too much. Whereas if the objective is to consume as much CO2 as possible, then you probably would like to go towards those fuel type of molecules, ethanol, methanol, but they have a low market value, but a very large market volume. So these are the ways you can decide which products are more interesting, one versus the other. Now, and it's not as if the market does not exist. The market is already there. So it's combining with the solar power using an electrolyzer. You can make products like formic acid, which is this much 0.8 billion market. And then you can make, starting from this C1, you can make further carbon monoxide and other fuels and sustainable chemicals, which is a quite large market globally. And they can be further up concentrated into consumer end products. Now I come to some examples, very quick examples. So the first one that comes to mind is the Carbon Recycling International plant in Iceland, which produces methanol combined with CO2 and hydrogen over a catalyst. So this is the famous George Ola plant established in 2011. Now this is relatively a small power plant converting almost 5,500 tons of CO2 per annum. But now they are building the world's largest CO2 to chemical plants in China, in Tongizin, that will be converting 160,000 tons of CO2 each year. So that's a significant number. And I just wanted to show this particular example because this is just in a matter of a decade that they have moved from this plant to that large capacity now. and that's under construction. The other example I wanted to show is from LanzaTech. So this is the example of biological conversion. So this company, US-based, originated from New Zealand. They use proprietary microorganisms, especially Clostridium autoethanogenum, that have the ability to also take up compounds like CO2 and CO in presence of hydrogen to make fuels and chemicals. And they have this pilot plant already running in China for some years. They published the results coming from real flue gas that they got from the municipal treatment plant there. And now they are building a very large production plant in Belgium, close to Ghent. And there's the Steelanol plant where they want to make ethanol from CO2 that will be used for the fuel purposes. The third example is I want to show you is about the polymer production, which is called the Dream Production Plant of Bayer, where they make polyols from CO2. And probably, I think you can also buy some of these mattresses made out of these polyols in the market. So 3 different types of technologies. There are several others, but I just limit myself to these 3, and I have added the references there. You can always go back to them and search for others and other examples in the current status. Now, another thing I wanted to show you is the things that we are busy with, and this is about the role of public funding. So we are also a public organization. So the research we are doing is supported by the Flemish government, Belgian government, as well as a lot by the European Commission as well. So I just want to show you an example of a pilot plant that we built recently. It's a finished project that was finished in March of this year. It was called Loader to Methanol, and where we built a TRL6. Again, I keep coming back to this term technology readiness level. So TRL6 is a plant that we built at our site, but then we shipped it to our industrial partner, where it was tested with a real flue gas to access its performance, right? So this was a 5 kilowatt pilot that was tested at RWE facility in Germany. And then as a continuation of this, the same consortium, we got another project called Eco to Fuel, which is a Green Deal project where we will upscale this pilot from TRL6 to TRL7 or 8 up to 50 kilowatt. This should be ready by next year. And then we will, again, the target is to produce methanol starting from carbon dioxide. And some highly ambitious numbers are written there in terms of, the runtime as well as efficiency and the products that we should make. So this is how the pilot looked like, and eventually we put all the parameters around it in a truck, which can be shipped to the on-site. Now, globally, what is the status of CCUS project? And this is the figure I got from International Energy Agency, which also keeps tracks of such projects globally. And what you can see here is the number of CCUS projects that have been funded or in operational in the last 11 years or so, starting from 2010 up to 2021. Now, what you see here, interestingly, is that the numbers was higher, and then they dropped in between after 2014 up to 18. And now the 2021 was kind of a watershed moment where almost 100 such plants were initiated or are under construction. And something changed in between, and maybe we can have this discussion afterwards. But somewhere, because the initial plants that were started were only used as a standalone plants. So they were just by themselves with no supporting infrastructure, no connection to the other actors and no stakeholders there. So that's why probably a lot of them actually stopped functioning over time, whereas the situation is completely changed now. There is more political support and also more incentives, but also now they are coming as a hub together. So this is the reason there is a much hope from this new type of plants that are currently being initiated and will be operational in coming next few years. With this, I want to give you a timeline that has been proposed, not in a scientific publication. So this is a long-term timeline for proposed CO2 utilization methods. And if you look for the next 5 to 10 years, and this reference is not very old, it's only from 2018, you can see. So electrocatalysis, photocatalysis, they say it will be a 5 to 10 year time scale. 10 to 50 years, it will be biohybrid nanoporous confinement. And 70 years will be chain reaction molecule. So these are the topics which are really at nascent stage, and you can say TRL1 or TRL2 at the moment. So this is just an idea to give you, it takes time for the research to reach into the practice. So to conclude, if I can say, I would like to mention that there exist actually multiple valorization pathways with which you can convert CO2 into a desired fuel or product. And each of these routes depend on the pathway that you choose to work with. The different multiple pathways, either it's biological, chemical, electrochemical, plasma, thermochemical, are at different technology readiness scale at the moment. Some of them are more advanced than the other. But then there is always a cost associated to each of these pathways, and it varies according to the variables, location, and a lot of other factors. In terms of technologies, so thermochemical and bioelectrochemical routes are currently seems most technically feasible near-term opportunities. but then they also have challenges like lower equilibrium conversion and also limited, C1 to C3 product distribution. Whereas the direct electrochemical pathways show long-term promise, but currently are at lower TRL, and they need to overcome the challenges of converting the more electrons into products as well as longer lifetime. With this, I would like to conclude my presentation here, and I would like to discuss with you afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deepak, for this very interesting presentation. So now I would like, so as we said before, so you can ask questions on our social media, on LinkedIn and Twitter. We have made a post where you can just go and write your comments and questions. So now I give the floor to Professor Jan Mertens, invited professor at the University of Ghent, and also chief scientist at ENGIE.
Thank you, Sylvia.
And he will speak about the role of CCU in the energy systems.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for having me here. So my name is Jan Mertens. I'm the Chief Science Officer at ENGIE and also a part-time professor at the University of Ghent. So I'd like to talk about the role of CCU in the energy system and how we think that it's more than hiding CO2 for a while. I first want to take a step back and see or talk about how we see this CCU story in the overall pathway toward this carbon neutrality that we're after. And I think we see three pathways towards this carbon neutrality, and their order is important. And I think the first one is something that we've been doing for decades. It's all about energy efficiency. So the best energy is the one that you don't use. So there's something that we've started. This is increasing energy efficiency, thinking a lot more circular, but still a lot of the effort will have to come from this, in fact, increasing this energy efficiency. And then the second one is what everybody's talking about, and we as well, and we rightly should. We should try to electrify whatever is possible, and far beyond just our cars. We think we should try to electrify whatever is possible. Sorry, after that. And then the third one, and this is where CCU and carbon capture and utilization and e-fuels or CO2 fuels or however you want to call them will come in play. And this is a nice graph which I took from a paper published in Nature at the end of last year, where they use this idea of marginal abatement cost of CO2. So basically on the y-axis, it shows how much does it cost to avoid the emittance of a ton of CO2. And there you see things like passenger cars, but also a lot of things at home, including possibly home heating and stuff like that. If you can do it with electricity, it's probably the cheapest, the most efficient, and the best way to do it. Also in industry, but you see costs start going up. It starts costing more and more. But in the industry, if you can do it with electricity, it's probably a good idea. And you should try to electrify as much as possible also in the industry. But you can see that for large mobility, aviation, shipping, but also long-term storage of energy or long-distance transport of energy, you will probably not do as electricity. We will not store electricity in batteries for months over seasons. It's clear that we will need these molecules. And of course, these molecules can be bio-based, you can make them from biomass. I will not discuss that today. Today, we're talking about the electricity-based ones. So here you will use the electricity, convert it to molecules to do these things which we cannot do with electricity. And there are multiple, it's not a small market that is left. So there is a big opportunity there for these e-molecules or CCU or CO2-based molecules. I took this figure from the IPCC because they use exactly the same notion of the marginal cost of the marginal abatement cost of a ton of CO2. And where you see blue, you can see this is like solar and wind electricity. It's cheaper to do it with electricity. And where you see here, these are the things that you will have to do with molecules. And of course, it will probably be a little bit more expensive because you will need a lot of this electricity and turn it into molecules. So we can actually do high temperature in the industry, long-term storage of energy, long distance transport of energy, aviation, shipping, all these things. We will need these molecules, which will be made from electricity for a large part. And the good news is that we are. Could you start the animation on this? I don't know who has the computer. Could you? There is an animation on it. If you just, it shows you what happened. Oop. Yeah. It shows you what happened over the last 20 years. I think you have to click on the left bottom. There is a play. Yeah, you see. So over the last 20 years with respect to electricity. So in 2021, we for the first time reached 10% of our electricity made from wind and solar. You can see Germany and Denmark, of course, already at the end of the last decade taking the lead. But if you see what's happening after 2010, You see a lot of European countries, of course, moving up forward very, very fastly, but also look things like big countries like China and the USA. Today, more than 10% of their electricity actually comes from wind and solar. And if you add mostly hydropower, you end up with around 38% of our electricity generation in 2021 that is made from renewables. So we will need a lot of it to be used as electricity, but also to be converted into the molecules that we will need to do the things that we cannot do immediately with the electricity. And so if we need these molecules, the first obvious molecule that everybody's talking about, I'd almost dare to say, is hydrogen. And I will spare you all the different colors of hydrogen. We will mainly focus on the green hydrogen, which is made from renewable electricity, wind and PV. You split your water, as Deepak already said, into hydrogen and oxygen. And of course, you can use your hydrogen and use it in your in the industry wherever you need it. So hydrogen, I would dare to say, is the first obvious molecule, right? To be used immediately. But the challenge with hydrogen is really related to its energy density. And this is what we try to depict in this picture here. So if you want to transport or store a certain amount of energy, don't worry, 10 kilowatt hours, it doesn't matter how much. But if you want to transport or store this amount of energy, you can actually do that in 1 liter of diesel or petrol or kerosene. You only need 1 liter to store this amount of energy. If you want to store it in batteries, as I've said before, you would need enormous amounts of batteries, like 27 times the volume you would need to store the same amount of electricity. Now, if you go to hydrogen, it's better, but not that much better, I'd dare to say. So you see that if you compress it to 350 bars, you still need to transport and move and store 13 times the same amount of volume around to transport the same amount of energy as in 1 liter of diesel or petrol. Now, if you compress it to 700 bar, you end up with 7 times. You can even make it liquid. We can make hydrogen liquid. We have to go down to minus 250 degrees. But even then, we still have to transport 4 times the amount of energy. And making hydrogen liquid with the technologies that we have today, we lose about 35 or 40% of the energy in the hydrogen to make it liquid. So that's why we think we will need things like methane, ammonia, methanol, all these kinds of synthetic hydrocarbons to actually make this energy transportable and storable. Of course, if you can use hydrogen, if you have a production close by and you need to store it or move it, probably hydrogen is the second best after electricity. But for a lot of cases, we will need to move energy around or store energy around, and we will need these molecules, which is why we spend a lot of effort on these molecules. And so once we agree that we will still need these molecules, this is what we should stop doing. We should stop taking the natural gas out of the ground. In this case, stop taking methane out of the ground for using it in our infrastructure for electricity and heat, because of course we're emitting CO2, and which is what we want to reduce or stop emitting. But we still need the molecule, so we've got no other choice as to synthesize this, as to manufacture it. And that, of course, we need to do, taking CO2 as a base, as a resource from the air or through biogenic, make it react with water. In many cases, you will first split your water with renewable electricity into hydrogen and oxygen, make it react over a catalyst, or as Deepak said, with bacteria. There's 2 ways to do it, but make react CO2 with water or with hydrogen, turn it into the molecule that we're after, because we agree that we still need it for high temperature heat, for long distance storage, for long transport. And then, of course, we can use it. And this way, we can be completely carbon neutral. If you look in the IPCC, carbon neutral will not be enough to help reach the Paris Agreement. Part of the CO2 will also have to store it away, either in products or in CCS. So this is one of the examples that we at ENGIE are working on, but we've got many more. So this is, I like this one because it takes biogenic CO2, which is CO2 actually from the atmosphere, if you wish, but captured by plants in a biogas installation. We take the CO2, so biogas, it's about 60% methane, 40% CO2. We take the CO2, we make it react. In this case, it's catalytically, chemically over a catalyst with hydrogen that we produce from renewable electricity and water, make it react, turn it into methane, which we can then do the things which we cannot do with electricity, as I said before. This is why we think that CCU is more than hiding CO2 for a while. Because of course, what we're doing today is, let's say we've got 2 industrial processes where you take 2 CO2s in the form of, let's say it's methane, out of the ground, you're using your industrial process, and of course you emit 2 times the CO2. Now, a lot of people are saying, but with the CCU, you still emit your CO2, right? Because you take it, you use it, and it's still emitted. Well, it's true. But at least if you do it with, even in the case if you do it with fossil CO2, you capture it, and it's still emitted. You make it react first with hydrogen, you turn into methane, and it's still emitted. So this is true. It is just a delay in the emission of the CO2. But what you have done at the same time is you have prevented taking another one out of the ground. So theoretically, already using fossil CO2, you can save potentially up to 50% of the CO2 emissions, even if you use CO2 from fossil based. Of course, it's not our ambitions. Our ambitions in the long term should be this, where you're completely carbon neutral, where you take your CO2 biogenically or from direct air capture, make it react with your renewable hydrogen made from electricity, which allows you, of course, to be completely carbon neutral. So this is the story on CCU and how we think that we will need CO2 as a resource and how we will need these fuels. But I wanted to take the opportunity to highlight 2, I would like to say, allies of all these technologies that I've talked about. And we are rightly obsessed with CO2, but I think we are not yet obsessed enough with 2 other things that go along with these technologies. And one of them is this issue of critical materials. If you look at the IEA, this was published at the end of last year. If you look for a car, for example, where I said we should go electricity to electricity, fully right. Of course, we do not need molecules. I think for your personal cars, electricity can do the job much better. But if you look at the electricity car compared to a conventional car, you need about 6 times more of these metals. And the same is true for our wind and our PV. Compared to coal and nuclear and natural gas, we need a lot more of these metals to actually succeed in this energy transition. And it's not only true for PV, it's not only true for wind, but even for the hydrogen technologies, your fuel cells, your electrolyzers, and even in the catalyst that we will need to convert the CO2 into molecules, we will need a lot of these metals. And I think we should have more attention to this. And it is not only about having enough, it's also about the environmental impact. So we're doing good things with respect to CO2, but we should really take care to improve our practices with respect to mining environmentally, but also socially, because there are also a lot of social issues related to these minerals. And the IPCC mentioned it in the report, but sorry, I've already given away the second one. The IPCC mentioned it in the report in a box, but it was only mentioned for renewables and batteries. I really think also for hydrogen and CCU, and TNO has recently also published a nice report on it, how they could also be a showstopper, or at least show down our ambitions with respect to hydrogen and CCU, and not only for electricity. I think this requires more of our attention if we really want to succeed in the energy transition. And the second one, and then I'll stop, is water. If you look at the overall, this is from an IRENA report from this year, if you look at the overall water consumption that we will need to meet our hydrogen ambitions, it's actually not that large compared to the agricultural water use and the industrial water use. The trouble is, of course, and as already was mentioned by Deepak, a lot of this hydrogen will be produced in areas where we have a lot of sun, where PV electricity is cheap and abundant, and those usually do not coincide with areas where you have access to lots of clean water. So I think this is a second one, second climate change ally, as I like to call them. It goes along with the CO2, which deserves more of our attention. And I will stop here, Celia, if that's okay. So we should start seeing CO2 as a resource, but save a seed for raw materials and water, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Jan, for this very comprehensive presentation. I think very clear as well. So now I will give the floor to Dr. Paola Carey, which is CTO from Carbonate Systems, and she came from the UK, to give a presentation on the role of CCU in the building sector. Paola, the floor is yours. So, light and left and right.
Lovely, thank you very much. I'm bullied by my PR person in the new version of Carbonate Systems, so we have to have pictures and things nowadays. Well, I'm not used to this. So I'm one of the founding directors and the Chief Technical Officer of Carbonate Systems. We were a company started in 2006, so we've been around for a long time, but we were very small for a long time, and we've suddenly, during the pandemic, we've grown from 5 people to more than 35 to 40. So so I've been invited to talk about the role of CCU in the building sector, and it follows on very nicely from the previous talk and the idea of mining. So we'll come back to that in a minute. So I want to talk about the CO2 footprint of construction materials, a very quick focus on the concrete industry, because obviously that's where we can make the most impact in terms of CCU. Talk about carbonation and mineralization as a CCU technology. What products can we make and how can we generate the value? And what's the sort of capture capacity that we can envisage for carbonation and mineralization? Whoops, too quick. So the carbon footprint of the construction industry. It's something that we're not going to get away from very easily because we have increased urbanization, and you just look at that picture of New York and you can see the amount of different building materials that are in use. Principally concrete, so hence the emphasis on concrete, but also the huge amount of steel, brick, and then aluminium that goes into our global building materials. It was very difficult to find any data on actually what the carbon impact of the construction industry is. So I've got figures there from 11 to 38%. I think it depends on how you look at it, whether it's just, I think it's 38% of the sort of energy related emissions, but overall the emissions are probably a bit lower than that if you take the whole package. But the cement industry themselves admit to between 7 and 8% of all global carbon dioxide emissions. So you can see we've got different sorts of point sources that are dominating the carbon dioxide emissions. Cement plants are not generally near where there are networks for CCS. They are isolated plants because they're determined by the geology rather than by urbanization. And then there's the classic picture that Al Gore used of the brickworks in India, where you're producing not only particulates that are polluting the Taj Mahal, but you're producing a lot of CO2 and eroding the soil in a totally unsustainable way of producing building materials. So the carbon footprint of concrete, I think most in about 2018, the MPA published a figure that 1 ton of concrete produced 32 kilograms of CO2. But they were very proud to announce that that was a reduction of about 30% on the 1990 figures. Just for comparison, glass has a footprint of 3 tons of CO2 per ton of glass. I'm not going to talk about how we can do anything about the glass industry. It's a real challenge because it's a thermal process. There's been an awful lot of work on trying to reduce the CO2 in the cement component of the concrete. So if you think of the embodied carbon dioxide in the concrete, it's about 75% of it is due to the cement. And that has reduced by 30% over the last 30 years by the major changes that the cement industry are making. A lot of that is driven by the Global Cement and Concrete Association, and they have a roadmap just recently published, which involves 6 different elements. Replacing the fossil fuels in the kilns. So instead of burning coal and gas, move to alternative fuels, including refuse-derived fuel, and indeed hydrogen. There's one plant in the UK that has trialed the use of hydrogen to fire their kiln, unfortunately in conjunction with other fuels. Changing to renewable energy for the other energy requirements of the plant. Deploying carbon capture at scale, well, they're going to have a problem because what are they going to do with the CO2? Because the cement works tend to be dispersed sites. reducing the amount of clinker in the cement. So about 60% of the CO2 in cement is the direct result of calcination of the limestone. So you have to heat limestone up, and that releases the CO2 to get your cement chemistry right. So if you can reduce the amount of that sort of Portland cement type clinker in the cement, you can lower the overall footprint of the cement. They put the emphasis on recycling more concrete from construction and demolition waste. Well, that's very well, and I can talk about that in a little bit more, how important mineralization is in that area. But in the UK, for example, 95% of concrete demolition waste is already recycled. We can enhance the level of CO2 uptake in concrete, it says, through recarbonation and enhanced carbonation. When I started a long time ago in the carbonation world, if you talked about carbonation of concrete, all the civil engineers all threw up their hands in horror. Oh no, that's terrible. That's a deleterious process in concrete life. Because if you carbonate concrete, the CO2 moves in towards the steel and depacifies the steel. The steel needs an alkaline environment to survive. If you carbonate the concrete, the alkalinity disappears and the steel will corrode and the concrete will fracture. But suddenly the concrete industry all said, oh, well, let's encourage the CO2 into that concrete. But we have to be very careful with that. Anyway, but I can argue that 5 of the 6 elements that the GCCA have proposed are directly or indirectly related to carbonation or mineralization. So what is it? It's a natural process. And I think that's really important to talk about, because it's a very low energy form of CCU. In nature, calcium and magnesium ions, generally dissolved in the ocean, are converted to limestone or dolomite through absorption of the CO2 into calcium carbonate. So fossil plants and sea animals are very efficient at converting that CO2 into calcium carbonate. And that calcium carbonate lasts for millions of years. So I put up an example. This is the White Cliffs of Dover, Cretaceous. I'm a geologist by training, so I like to put up pictures of rocks. So the Cretaceous, few 100 million years old. So it's been around for an awful long time. And we've used limestone or marble, which is the same thing, extensively as a building material. And there, because I've got an Indian theme, I put the Taj Mahal up. Here's a beautiful example of a marble building, which is quite old. It's been there without too much damage, except for the brickworks down the road who are producing particulates that are changing its color. So there's a very strict regime. You can't have brick making too near the Taj Mahal. So the concrete itself will carbonate naturally through reaction with CO2 in the air. And it's a really simple reaction. CaO plus CO2 gives you calcium carbonate. So that reaction that takes millions of years in the geological column or the geological context can be accelerated if you just increase the amount of CO2 that you've got in the environment, or you manipulate the environment a bit. You put a bit more moisture in, or you change the pressure conditions. And people are doing carbonation at high temperatures and pressures, and in wet carbonation with a lot of water or with only a small amount of water. So there's a variety of different ways of doing carbonation. But basically it's the same reaction as going on in nature. Calcium and magnesium, oxides, silicates, hydroxides can be forced to react with the CO2 to form carbonates. And you can use those carbonates to bind the materials together or produce other sorts of products. So these minerals can be found in natural environments, so particularly basic and ultra basic rocks, so basalts, serpentinites, and the nights you see I'm a geologist again, I like to throw these rock names out. But also, more importantly, particularly if we're talking about circularity, you can find those minerals in a range of industrial thermal residues. So steel slags, ashes from energy from waste, cement and concrete residues, etc. But most importantly, the reaction is exothermic. That means it gives out energy when you get the conditions right. You don't need to put in a lot of energy. I'm fed up of reading papers where it says mineralization is not possible in scale because you need to put so much energy into it. No, you don't. It's an exothermic reaction, so you don't need large amounts of energy. And it's permanent capture, as illustrated by the chalk cliffs of Dover or the Taj Mahal. And you can use both pure CO2 and directly captured CO2 from either flue stacks or from direct air capture plants. You don't need pure CO2. And you can make lots of different products that admittedly tend to be this low value but high volume market. And that's quite an important thing because you're not distorting the market when you're making these products. So if you make aggregate from residues, it's entering a huge market, and you can design your aggregate to fit into a niche market. So you're not causing problems within the general aggregates market. But just listing the different products, we've got supplementary cementitious materials. These are the things that are replacing the clinker in the cement, so lowering the overall carbon footprint of the cement. We can make cements that don't hydrate but carbonate. A lot of work has gone on in making concrete blocks where the strength is derived from carbonation rather than hydration of cement. And then the world that I live in at the moment, which is making aggregate using the calcium carbonate to cold bond manufactured aggregate for a variety of construction applications. So just quickly about supplementary cementitious materials. There's an awful lot of work going on at the moment trying to look at construction and demolition waste, because if you think you knock down a building, it's like having an urban quarry. So you've got a lot of material readily available. Several projects have been using the C&D waste to make SEMs, partly driven by the fact that our other SEMs are diminishing. We use extensively PFA from coal power, coal-powered power stations, and also blast furnace slag have been used in cement for a long time and have important properties in the cement. But if you carbonate the calcium silicates in the cement, you can produce both a calcium carbonate and a silica phase, which provides a limestone filler and what's called a pozzolan, which helps with the cementitious properties of the overall cement. So as I say, there are various European projects, and a lot of the cement industry have got interested in using C&D waste. I've put Carbon Cure in here. Carbon Cure is a very good example of a company that's widely expanding, particularly in the North America, where it's like a supplementary cementitious material in that they add CO2 to fresh concrete as it's poured, which, although they don't use an awful lot of CO2, it enhances the hydration of the cement, speeds it up, so that you can use less cement for the same strength. And they say over the last 4 years of their operation, it looks fairly modest at 160,000 tons. But if you think at least 50% of that is in the last year because of their expansion, I think they have great potential, because every cement truck or concrete truck could have CO2 fitted to it. So carbonatable cements, manufactured from a variety of natural materials, or sometimes thinking about, again, the industrial thermal residues that could be used. So these are producing calcium and magnesium silicates, which don't hydrate, but if you mix them with both water and CO2, they can go hard and cement materials together. Probably the most famous of those is Solidia, again in North America, where they're manufacturing a cement from a wollastonite type silicate. And they're using that cement to make concrete blocks by curing at relatively high temperatures and pressures in a CO2 chamber. Then the whole field of concrete blocks, a lot of companies are using steel slags, again, the calcium, particularly calcium silicates in steel slags. You can form that into a block, cure it at high temperatures and pressures, and make very nice concrete blocks with no Portland type cement in at all. And Orbic's already mentioned, a spin out from Vito, and there's Carbicrete in Canada as well as a number of other companies looking at the use of steel slags. Going on to the mining, we've got, yes, sorry, in mining waste, MCI using mining waste to extract the magnesium and make blocks or boards from magnesium carbonates. And then there's serpentinites where Cambridge carbonates are again manufacturing blocks. So in the aggregates field, again, people using C&D waste because of it being in abundance, and Blue Planet in the USA extracting the natural aggregates and sand from the concrete and demolition waste, and then solubilizing the calcium ions from the cement fines and precipitating calcium carbonate to make nice limestone, what I would call ooliths or rounded aggregates. Similarly, the New Stark in Switzerland are doing that, and they are the first company to earn methodology approval for removal certification in the voluntary market so that they can actually get value out of the CO2 that they're capturing. And they say that they can have concrete with a 10% improvement in the carbon footprint. And of course, I must mention us, Carbonate Systems. We're treating a whole range of industrial residues. We're using flue gas derived CO2 directly to make an aggregate. Again, tends to mostly go into concrete blocks, but it has some other applications. I'm sorry, I'm overrunning, am I? Okay, that'll be very quick. Just to think about the value and the quantities, the vital bit is underneath the label at the bottom there. If you took all the residues in Europe, you've got about 28 million tons of CO2 that can be captured per year in Europe. That's the amount of residues over 1 million tons globally in these just 5 different thermal processes. So the value of that in terms of market size is 1,200 million pounds. So it's a good commercial enterprise. There are many companies that are already fully commercial, TRL 9, and those companies have had major investments over the past few months and recognized in that voluntary carbon credits market. Important thing, we can permanently capture gigatons of CO2 in a value generating process. So to capture a ton of CO2 in our process, you can make €200 rather than it costing you. Products tend to be low value, high volume, lots of growth, and we must be looking at environmental product declarations and LCAs to prove the carbon credentials of the materials and those things that we need to do as well to help it. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Paola, for this very comprehensive talk on the role of CCU and mineralization in the building sector. So now I would like to invite remotely Professor Angela Di Benedetto from the University of Bari in Italy. So she will join us on Zoom. So Angela, can you
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you
Welcome,
very
Angela.
much.
The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. This is just to introduce myself and my organization. which is named CIRCC, Inter-University Consortium on Chemical Reactivity and Catalysis, which was founded in 1994 and couples 17 Italian universities. My research group deals with the valorization of spent carbon, either CO2 or residual biomass, as documented by some example of papers and books published in which since a long time we advocate CO2 as building block as source of carbon. CO2 conversion is at the heart of the circular economy. The key issue is how to develop technologies for the conversion of large volumes of spent carbon into working carbon. I will consider the actual and perspective conversion of CO2, covering thermal and light-driven processes, even considering the direct photochemical water CO2 conversion and integration of catalysis and biotechnology. Carbon dioxide can be used to produce a variety of bulk chemicals, as you can see here, such as organic carbonates, carbamates, carboxylates, urea, and also polymers. Such syntheses are at different TRL from 2,3 to 7,9. With the exception of ethene and benzene, all such reactions are low energy processes, as the oxidation state of the carbon atom remains +4 or goes to +3, or in some cases energy-rich co-reagents are used. Carbon dioxide can be used also for the production of fine chemicals such as lactones, pyrones, pharmaceuticals, which are interesting targets. And also even complex structure, such as the depicted here, can be obtained with a single direct reaction. In all such reactions, the key issue are the lifetime of the catalyst and the selectivity towards a target product. High TRL, around 6 or 7, has been reached only in the conversion of butadiene into the lactone. The table here gives the actual use of carbon dioxide in the synthesis of chemicals and the perspective use at 2030, calculated considering the expected market growth for the listed chemicals and assuming that the new technologies will be implemented. Today, more than 200 million tons of CO2 are used each year. The largest consumer is the urea industry. Urea, in fact, is used as fertilizers or raw material for urea formaldehyde resins applied in the automotive industry. Besides such uses, CO2 is also widely used as technical gas, as beverage additive, and for food storage, for the fabrication of metal, cooling, fire suppression, etc. The conversion into monomers for polymers attracts much interest these days. In fact, the production capacity, mainly for polycarbonates and polyols for polyurethanes production, used a very little amount of CO2. The alternative route to carbonate is the carboxylation of alcohol, a process with thermodynamic and kinetic bottlenecks. The equilibrium concentration of the carbonate is quite low, very often 1% or even less, at a temperature in the range of 400 or 450 Kelvin for the metal catalyzed reaction. The only co-product, as you can see, is the water that influences the catalyst activity and the equilibrium position. So in order to shift the equilibrium to the right, it is necessary to eliminate water. And the use of evaporation membrane seems to be a good way to increase the productivity of the process when compared to organic or inorganic water traps, which are quite efficient but need to be regenerated with large energy expenditure. Cyclic carbonates can be produced by one-step process via the oxidative carboxylation of olefins that needs research for improving the yield and selectivity, which is now around 50%. Interesting is also the use of urea as carbon dioxide substitute. Urea, in fact, can be considered as activated form of carbon dioxide, so it has been used for the synthesis of carbonates, either cyclic or linear carbonates, but even cyclic carbamates, monomers for polymers. The reaction mechanism has been studied by several authors. Ammonia can be recovered for reaching an economic acceptation. As a matter of fact, the reaction is not equilibrium controlled, but kinetics play a key role. The integration of biotechnology and catalysis can boost the production of selected carbonates as monomers of biopolymers. Bioglycerol can be converted into 1,3-propandiols via biotechnological routes, which is then converted by chemical catalysis into 3-methylene carbonate, which can find utilization in the polymer industry. All carbon atoms are biosourced in this example. The figure here shows the Gibbs free energy of formation of several C1 species. It is quite evident that when the oxidation state of the carbon atom remains around 4, the reaction may be exergonic. Conversely, when it is reduced from +4 to where is in CO2 to 2 or lower, a significant amount of energy is needed, and what is also important, hydrogen is necessary. That must not be of fossil origin. Today, 95% of hydrogen is of fossil origin, and methane reforming hydrogen is much cheaper than PV hydrogen. The difference is the 1.1 euros versus 2.5, 4.5 euros per kilos. And so the use of PV hydrogen in the reduction of CO2 to chemicals and energy products is a must. The use of perennial energy, solar, wind, hydro, geo, is essential for large volumes of CO2 conversion into a variety of chemicals. Light-driven chemistry may offer interesting perspectives. Recently, the direct insertion of CO2 into CH bond of organic compounds has been shown to occur under photocatalysis to generate carboxylic acid, a reaction not yet feasible via thermal catalysis. Photochemical processes can be used also for the reduction of CO2, in which semiconductors produce excitons upon irradiation and generate electrons and holes used in the reaction of CO2 and oxidation of an electron donor, respectively. Interesting are also the hybrid bio-inspired system used for the enzymatic reduction of CO2 to methanol in water that combines two processes. The enzymatic reduction of CO2 to methanol, promoted by the reduced form of the coenzyme NADH, with the in situ photocatalytic reduction of NAD+ to F for NADH using semiconductors. The last two reactions introduce new processes which do not need hydrogen for CO2 reduction that occurs under proton to electron coupled PTHE scheme. Water is used instead. So a game-changing process that avoids hydrogen production, stockage, transport, distribution, avoiding the production, as both can be derived from the atmosphere, it makes ubiquitary the production of chemicals and fuels. Makes use of perennial energy sources for CO2 valorization, mimicking nature. Great interest by EU and other international organizations is evident as several calls are available. A winning strategy is to design value chains based on CO2 conversion, as shown in this slide, so that several processes are linked and optimized. Clustering of processes is also a winning option that allows to optimize the use of resources. So, in conclusion, we can say that CO2 is a valuable source of carbon, the most abundant we have at hand, atmospheric CO2. It is already used in the chemical industry at a rate of 200 million tons per year. Using the existing knowledge, the expectation is to cover over 370 million tons per year by 2030, avoiding more than 1,000 million tons of CO2 per year. Nature makes CO2 thousands energy-rich compounds using solar energy, and the potential of the chemical market is around 1 gigaton of CO2, but the combination of the use of the solar energy with CO2 hybrid catalysis may bring to the reduction to fuels, enlarging the utilization to several gigatons per year level, with concomitant reduction of extraction of fossil carbon and real impact on climate change mitigation. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Angela, for this very interesting talk on the role of CO2 feedstock in the chemical industry. May I ask you, Angela, I think your camera is hidden, so we could not see your face. So for the Q&A now, could you—
Oh, sorry, I forgot to open it, sorry.
No problem. And I would like to invite the speakers of this first panel to come on stage to answer the questions. And maybe we can show on the screen here again and also online the QR codes where people can ask questions. So people who are online, please feel free to ask your questions on our LinkedIn. We have made a special post for that, and on our Twitter. So if you can just take a picture of this QR code, and we will take also your questions. But I will first start with the people in the room. Do you have a questions for our speakers, for Angela also, who will be present? I think Angela, you can hear us, yes?
Yes.
Yes, and she will be also shown on the face. Yes, Volker, you will get a microphone. Sorry. Yeah, we have to use a microphone because to make sure everyone
Thank you.
Volker
Sick, University of Michigan. I have a question for Jan, who nicely illustrated the need to transport energy in convenient ways. We could also think about moving electricity and decentralizing the production of these storage molecules. Is there an advantage to one or the other? In other words, moving the hydrogen or methane, or moving the electricity to where we make it for long-term storage?
Please use a microphone and just.
So, I'm sorry, maybe I'm not correctly understanding your question. So you're thinking about things like high voltage direct current lines or things like that?
Whatever it would be, instead of thinking about building up the
right?
infrastructure to move large amounts of hydrogen, which you illustrated was expensive and large.
I think it will be an and story as always, and so where you can do it with the transport of electricity using, for example, high voltage direct current lines, it's probably a good solution. We're building them between the UK and Europe, between Norway also and Belgium. There's a big project, but we will need also to transport them, I think, intercontinental and overseas. And I think that will be that is just impossible with high voltage DC lines. It's impossible with batteries. So you could not transport the electrons as electrons. And I think for those pathways, we will clearly need to transport molecules. And then hydrogen is the most obvious one, but as I said, it's very difficult to do. So that's why we think probably hydrogen is not the best molecule to transport intercontinental or over long distance overseas. That's why we think the CCU fuels or other E-molecules, methanol, methane, but even ammonia will be part of the solution. And it will not be one. We probably would need all of them for different applications. That's the way I think I would see it.
Thank you very much, Jan. Any other questions in the room here? So then I will take a question for Paula that have been asked online. But first, many people commented on your presentations and for all your presentations, and congratulate you for them and thank you for them. But there is a question on what is the current legal framework for carbonated cement in Europe and how is it regulated? So first, the first part. So what is the current legal framework for carbonation and for the cement?
That's a very difficult question.
Yes, very difficult. Maybe we can ask also our senior policy manager to answer this question.
Yes.
So today,
yeah,
come
sure.
on stage,
Thanks. I can try. It's as you said, it's a very broad question. So currently, I think the main question that is asked is how mineralization is recognized in the EU policy framework. And if you look at the ETS regulation currently, and maybe Paula can comment on this as well, there is this question on whether companies that will invest into mineralization, how it's how basically the ETS quotas are removed, let's say, or that the companies that are investing into that don't need to surrender basically allowances for mineralization. So I think the key question from the perspective of CO2 Value Europe is how is the European Union looking at incentivizing basically for mineralization to happen, and what will be the legal definitions that define what mineralization is. So for example, in the current proposal of the Commission, there is this definition that CO2 shouldn't be released under normal use in a product that was mineralized. And the question is, what is this normal use and how will it be defined basically by EU law? But maybe Paula, you want to complete what I've been saying.
Well, I was going to look at it from a different point of view in terms of the specification of the cements and the fact that if you start using other materials in cement, what does that do to the standards and specifications for concrete? But I think, as I said, these sorts of supplementary cementitious materials have been used in cement and concrete for a long time. And so as long as the concrete still has meets the same specifications and strengths, then effectively it's an accepted process to start using carbonation and carbonated materials in those products.
Another question for you, Paula. So to do carbonation, you need to have industrial waste. So you need a good industrial waste management. And I think this is a very big challenge. And you also need to have access to CO2. And even though we have way too many CO2 emissions, this is still quite a challenge for carbonation companies. How do you see that evolving? So the waste management and the access to CO2?
Apart from the fact that buying pure CO2 is very expensive, and there's, particularly in the UK, there's often a shortage of pure CO2. If you're using direct CO2 from flue gases, I've never considered the problem of the shortage of the CO2. I get phone calls every couple of weeks saying, I've got X tons of CO2 from my process, what can I do with it? Much more importantly is the difficulty of putting the residues and the CO2 together. But using the sort of distributed plant that Carbonate Systems is developing, where we put a container at the source of the CO2, and that is typically where the residues are produced as well. So our development in the cement industry is treating the bypass dust from the cement manufacture with the CO2 that the cement plant is producing. So I think that you get into all sorts of difficulties if you're starting to transport waste around, and if you're having to then transport CO2. because obviously you've then got to purify it and transport it. So the key is to capture the CO2 directly from the flue stack where the wastes are being generated.
Thank you very much, Paula. Any other questions from the audience at that stage? Maybe for Deepak or for Angela? So otherwise, Deepak, I have a question for you. So you have shown the evolutions of the CCUS, so CCU and CCS projects over the last decade and a bit more. And we have seen that there is a dip and then it's starting to increase again. I expect that the CCU projects were not so many 10, 15 years ago, but quite some part of this increase is also because there are CCU projects. It's an emerging technology. We get more and more funding in this field. Can you comment on the quantification of that? So how many CCU project or?
That's correct.
Yeah, it's good. We can hear you, Deepak.
It's on, yeah. So mainly, like you mentioned, the initial phase last decade or so, most of the projects were CCS projects, and of course they are also more mature technologically, financially, and at the more advanced stage of development. Like we see this Porthos project in the Netherlands or the Longship project in Norway. They all are very close to the realization, I would say. In the last year's 100 projects that I showed you, I would say 1/3 were now CCU. So that's already a big step. So like you said, there is more support for not only policy support, but financial support also for CCU projects, but 2/3 are still CCS. So that's why in the IEA graph, they combine the both together and they call it CCUS. And then we have to make that distinction indeed.
Okay, and do you have a view also on how this will evolve in the coming decade?
Yeah, definitely the share of CCU projects is expected to go up as more and more of these projects are realized on ground and they start making commercial sense, so as to speak, that start selling the products, and there others will follow suit. A lot of these companies have also plans to replicate their first, the prototype, which will be commercially successful, and then to make the same plants in other parts of the world as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Deepak. Yes. To question, maybe I give the word just back, and then Volker, I will give you the. Yeah.
Yes, hello. My name is Hervé Kamerling from the Belgian cement industry. It's a question for all panelists, actually. In your view, what should be the market value of CO2 to make sure that all CCU projects, or let's say the majority, most of CCU projects, really expand quickly?
What I can only tell what I have read about the direct air capture. So the CO2 that's coming from the direct air capture, and currently apparently it's not economic, because they have given some benchmark numbers, and if I may be a bit away from the real number, but it says less than 30 euros per ton, including the transport cost. If you get there with the direct air capture, then you have a business case.
Well, I can say that with carbonation and mineralization, you don't actually need a value of the CO2. It helps, but actually because of the cost of disposal of a lot of these residues, that's what's paying for the process.
I can maybe add for the fuels that if you look at the cost of your fuel, in the end, the cost of your CO2 capture is not the main cost. It's all about the cost of your electricity and your green hydrogen that dominates, and also the capex of your electrolyzer. So it's about the energy and then I like, but maybe Catherine can talk more about this in the afternoon. There's also this upcoming idea of the social cost of carbon, where I think, and then of course it does not make so much sense as to, if you really take into account all the externalities that are caused by emitting a ton of CO2, then today they are already at, well, different estimates, but somewhere above 200, and this is expected to rise even more. So if you compare it to the social cost of carbon, then you end up with the hundreds per euros of ton already today.
Thank you, Jan. I think Volker, you had a question?
Yeah. Sorry.
Just very,
may I add something?
Yeah, sorry, Angela.
Oh, sorry. You have to consider also the fact that you need to reach some standard quality of carbon dioxide, otherwise the pollutants can act negatively on the system. The cost could be $100 per ton, more or less. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Yeah, I have another question for you afterwards, but maybe I give the word to Volker and then I will go back to Angela.
Volker Sick, University of Michigan. I initially wanted to ask Deepak, but maybe it's actually relevant to all. How much do you see that the increasing number of net zero commitments that companies come out with actually will lead to this observed increase in CCUS project. Is that something that you hear or yourself are engaged with because of that?
Yeah, so I partly mentioned it during my presentation also, the dip, this was because those projects were not, let's say, well, ahead of their time, so to speak. So there was less awareness, less support, politically, regionally, economically, whatever you call it. But now what at least we see especially is now currently the global capacity is 40 million tons, and that's nothing, peanuts compared to what is needed. 1.6 billion gigatons is the target by 2030. So you see this vast gap, and it needs to be fulfilled either by CCU, CCS, one way or the other. We need to get there. There is no other way about it, like Celia also said in her introduction. So I think this urgency, this necessity will push definitely the installation of more such plants and installed capacities.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as our company, Engie, we've said that we want to be carbon neutral by 2045, which is not a big, I mean, a lot of companies have announced it, but what is different, I think, is that we've announced it to be also on scope 3, which means that today we sell a lot of electricity and gas. I think for electricity, we've got good, we know about renewables, so they're even cheaper and cheaper. But if you want to also decarbonize or make them carbon neutral, the gas, there we have to look into things like CCU fuels and e-methane and e-methanol. So clearly, the way to reduce our scope 3 emissions, we start the emissions at our clients where we sell the gas. Well, it means that by 2045, we will no longer be able to sell them fossil gas. It will have to be carbon neutral gas and carbon neutral molecules. So we need these technologies. There's no way out.
Thank you. Paola, do you want to add
I just want to make a comment about the carbon removals and carbon credit market and how that's so, I mean, you can get, it goes back to the previous question about the value of CO2. And, you know, people are paying, these sorts of companies who are declaring themselves want to be net zero are paying, you know, $1,000 per ton of CO2. And I think it comes back to the point of having to make sure that you have a really rigorous LCA process in place so that you can show that it is real removals. But my other hobby horse is about direct air capture compared with capturing CO2 from a point source. In terms of the removal market at the moment, if I plug my plant into the flue stack, then I can't count the CO2. But if I move it 5 yards away and capture the CO2 from the air, it's the same CO2, I can't claim the carbon removals, which to me seems a completely mad situation.
Thank you very much, Paola. Angela, do you have something to add on this question?
No, thank you.
Yeah, so I would like to ask you, Angela, so you have presented a large panel of different chemicals that can be produced out of CO2. There are different technology readiness level. So my question to you is also, as we discussed a lot about the future, of course, what are the expectations in terms of commercializations of these different chemicals? How close are we to have it commercialized? And what are the most, what are the one that will be the quickest commercialized?
Oh, yes, as I said, there are already some processes that are commercialized. There are TRL around, you can go from 2-3 level of TRL to 7-9. For example, the synthesis of carbonate, either monomers or polymers, are quite at large scale, while the production of some kind of processes, for example, for the production of methanol, biomethanol, for example, the level is around 1-2 of TRL. So it's of course depending on the kind of process you are considering, and especially those that are based on biotechnologies or also solar fuels are at the low level of TRL.
Okay, thank you, Angela. And what do you think are the, from a research point of view also, what do you think are the incentives you need to speed up the situation, so to go faster to commercialization? So what are the incentives you will need?
What are, sorry?
What are the incentives you will need? So
yes, we need I have to say that there are interesting calls at the EU level, but we need funds, and also we need to integrate academia with industry in order to go together to a solution.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is a good, yeah, we have one more question and then we go to, yeah.
From the social media also for Paula. You mentioned a need for incentive to recover waste and process waste materials. What would you think would be the most efficient incentive in that sense?
I think we need to look very carefully at specifications, and the construction industry, well, buildings, people are very risk averse, and they tend to like to use materials that have been in use for 25 years. And I think nowadays we have to have a lot more open mind about the use of different construction materials, and particularly materials made from residues and wastes. So I think we need to have a lot more, everything from local government through to central government support for actually saying buildings have got to have low carbon materials used. So I think there are a lot of ways in which incentives can be put in place. I think New York State have a system where there are tax incentives for construction companies to have low carbon building materials in their tenders. So I think that's the sort of thing that we need, public procurement, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Paula. So now it's time to thank very much all the speakers and who are here, and Angela online. And so we will have a coffee break until 10 to 4. So we'll try to start again sharp at 10 to 4. So for those who are online, have a nice coffee at home. Here we'll have a nice coffee at the press club. So we meet again in 15 minutes. So good afternoon again. So we are back with a presentation from Professor Andrea Ramirez, who is going to speak about how to assess the role of CCU technologies on climate change mitigation. She's going to speak about life cycle analysis, etc. So Andrea, warm welcome here at the press club. We can see you. So the floor is yours.
Perfect, thank you. I don't see my screen with the slides, but now I see myself. Do you share the screen, the slides for me, or?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't see them.
You share the slide. No, you can share your screen, Andrea, and pass your slides.
Okay, I can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me look at it. It's okay now?
Yes, we just have a message on the top right that you can remove maybe.
Yes. So apologies for that. Too much things happening.
Maybe put it full screen. Can you put it full screen?
It is full screen. Just yeah. I see it now.
Yeah, no, it's good. And can we have the video of Andrea from Technique?
Do you want to have? Sorry.
No, it's good. You can start, Andrea. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, my camera is on. Everything's on. I don't know what is happening. I'm just going to start. So good morning, everyone. My name is Andrea Ramirez. I'm a professor on low carbon systems and technologies in the Netherlands. And I'm very sorry not to be there, but I'm very happy that in these times, despite all the problems that we have had in the last 2 years, it is possible still to join you via just a video call. So I have been asked whether I wanted to reflect a bit on the message that is coming in the IPCC, but also that is coming in the media about what is the role of CCU for climate change. And what you can see and is a little bit less present in the IPCC, but still you can read a bit on lines. Is still a lot of conflicting message, I think, is still in literature about how much you need CCU to reach deep climate mitigation targets, and what will be the role, what will be the benefits, what are the bottlenecks. So we are still, the picture is getting clear, I think, as we move compared to 5 or 6 years ago, but it's still not completely and fully clear, which is normal because CCU EU is not one product, it's an umbrella of products. So there are many changes that need to be evaluated, and of course, not strange to have different answers. What we saw from the IPCC, of course, is right now, based on literature, they are forecasting a potential of 1 to 2 gigatons of CO2 a year as utilization potential, and they are saying, but it can go up to 20 gigatons by mid-century, based, and it's not in this line, but based actually on the availability of low carbon energy. What I have here as well are 2 different pictures of how we look at the contribution and the market and the role of CCU. In your left, you have an article that has been recently published by the Klein et al. On whether CCU contributes to the mitigation targets, which is actually a much conservative view on actually what is the contribution, and we are going to speak about permanence as and the system conditions that will need to be in place for those systems to actually contribute to a net zero economy. And in your right, you have a report from the Global CO2 Initiative. It's from 2016, but Volker is there, and he will give you a most updated report about the potential market. What I can tell you, and I think you see as well, is that there is a lot of messages, and we identify difference in the messages on which kind of product is actually being handled. So the carbon footprints will be quite different if you have a plastic, or if you have a cement product, or you have enhanced oil recovery, or you have a fuel. All the difference that we see that can explain the large ranges are difference in the way on the system boundaries. That means, what am I analyzing? What is inside my analysis and what is outside my analysis? Difference on how much low carbon energy is actually available and used in the process throughout the life cycle. So from the start until the end, on the end of life of the product. How do we treat the end of life emissions? Whether indirect effects are or not accounting on, what am I comparing my CCU technology to, and what kind of timelines I am considering. So I'm just going to go through some of these to try to explain why it's not a black and white picture. So I found this, and I just borrow it from the article from the Klein, because I think it provides at least a good way of looking at the scoping, among other things. But you depart from, things that we need to look at when we are assessing whether CO2 utilization can play a role on our net zero targets. Are, of course, what is the source of the CO2? How do I capture the CO2? And you need to be careful that some methodologies, for instance, mineralization, you can actually use direct atmospheric air, as you do with terrestrial biomass. In another case, you actually need more pure CO2, and therefore you need to extract the CO2 either from a point source, so the flue gas, which is more concentrated, or atmospherically, which is highly diluted. So CO2 is a problem in terms of climate change, but when you are going to try to use it, you still have the issue that is only 400 ppm level, which is factor of magnitude more diluted than when you have from a flue source. What are you going to utilize the CO2 for? What is the type of final product you are using? So what is the route? What is the product? What are you substituting? And what is the lifetime? So understanding the performance of CCU will require looking at the full value chain. And what we mean there is that system boundaries matter. And this is, I know it may be, I kind of designed this for an online presentation, so I don't know how big it is in your screen. But this was published in 2019 when we were looking at what negativity is, or what systems are carbon negative. And what we realize, of course, is within your system boundaries of a study, the study could be correct, but that doesn't mean that really you are avoiding or no emission. You have to take as broad a system boundary as possible. So what these kind of figures show you is just a steel production. It's a simple figure. So you have your factory, you put coal, you produce steel, and you have emissions. So it's around of 1 ton of CO2 for 1 ton of steel. So you can start doing things there. You can put carbon capture and storage. And in that case, your balance is going to be 0.1 tons of CO2 per ton of steel if you have geological storage and if you put your system boundaries around the factory. What we notice is that this number that is here, so you see here CO2 balance 1 ton positive per ton of steel, here 0.1 ton still positive per ton of steel. So only, for instance, can get negative if instead of coal, I will use charcoal, which is actually coming from biomass. And I take into account that the biomass has taken CO2, I have charcoal, then I have the plant, a steel plant, and a steel carbon capture and storage, and suddenly I got negative emissions. What is not in this picture are all the emissions of transport and charcoal production. So suddenly, if you have exactly the same system, but you begin to account for all the intermediate steps, it goes again, the negativity decreases, and even if you account them for also the end of life, the negativity actually disappears. It's exactly the same system. We haven't changed any technology, we just have included or excluded elements of the analysis. So in order to really understand how carbon neutral or carbon negative is, you need to be very careful with the system boundaries that you include. And it looks like a very common sense conclusion, but when you try to compare life cycle assessments, then you realize that everyone is using different system boundaries, and therefore you can get even different conclusions for the same kind of product. This is just a life cycle assessment we did for use of CCS and CO2 in mineralization. We had case studies about actually using CO2 to having the concrete, so whether the concrete to absorb CO2 and actually is an utilization factor. But what we wanted to show just is you need to have the upstream emissions. You have to have, in this case, the cement and the concrete production. You have to take into account what happens during the use of the concrete, and you have to take into account what happens in the end of life. And only if you take all these flows that go out and in, then you are able to do a carbon balance and have a conclusion or insight of whether the system is going in the direction that you want to do. Now, how difficult could it be? You know, you do an inventory and you count carbon in, carbon out. So carbon accounting looks very simple. But what we have noticed is if you don't understand the life cycle concepts and the methodologies, then suddenly things begin to happen with the conclusions and with the analysis, which are not really proper, if you want to call it like that. And a typical confusion that we see now, and that is it's also a time of system concept, is the confusion between reductions and removals, which are for us from a life cycle assessment, and also from a climate science, two different things. Both are needed. So it's not like I'm saying you should only do reductions or you should actually only do removals. Actually, we should do both, and CCU can have a place in each of them. But we need to look at which part are we actually achieving with the CCU process. So what are we calling reduction, which sometimes people call carbon avoidance? It means that I'm still emitting. If you look in net terms, I'm still emitting CO2 into the atmosphere, only I'm emitting less than I would have emitted if I not have the CCU process or your energy efficiency process or any kind of mitigation process. So it's not that I'm not emitting anymore, it's just that I'm emitting less with respect to a reference. When we speak about carbon removal, we are speaking about a physical or reduction of CO2 from the atmosphere that is not coming back. And that's really a key difference. Where it comes, and it comes the confusion, is that sometimes when you do CO2 avoidance, you get a negative, a minus number in your calculation, and that is the minus sometimes is interpreted as a CO2 negativity, and I would like to say that's not the case. So let's assume that you have two products. You are going to produce a CO2 product that is going to replace a fossil-based one. or a bio-based plant or another one. What you generally do is say, well, if I will have produced this product in the current way, fossil-based, for instance, I will produce X amount of emissions. But because now I'm not doing that, I'm producing in another way, for instance, a carbon neutral way, I avoid those emissions, I can take credit for that avoidance. So I am actually crediting emissions that will not happen because I avoid them. So the results of the CO2 avoidance is not an inventory of actual physical emissions. And that is where all the confusion happens. These are really important for our net zero. So we need to avoid CO2, but that should not be confused with actually the removal of the carbon negativity that we will need as well. Part of this, and when I say avoidance, is it depends on the product you are substituting. And that's also a little bit of the confusion. So let's say that you have a CO2-based fuel. You can use the CO2-based fuel to displace gasoline. That's what we want. We would like to displace a fossil-based fuel. But it could be that you displace instead biofuel, or you displace hydrogen, or you displace an electric vehicle. So you can understand that the amount of emissions that I save are different in the case of gasoline to the case of hydrogen or electric vehicle or biofuel. So it is really easy sometimes, and it's needed as well, but really easy to assume that you are going to be displacing gasoline. But if that is not the case, if the most likely competitor when you develop the technology may be other, you need to look beyond that. And it's in life cycle assessment, we are recommending to look beyond only one and to look at different scenarios to really understand what will be the potential impact of a CO2-based technology. This is also because a lot of the time we assume that displacement will happen. And a lot of life cycle assessment assume I'm displacing A with B, so one-to-one basis. If I was producing 1 ton of gasoline, of 1 ton, sorry, of, I don't know, ethylene, then I'm gonna produce instead of 1 ton fossil-based ethylene, 1 ton of CO2-based ethylene, which is just, you know, a base chemical to produce plastic. But this is not always the case. Maybe I'm not displacing, maybe I'm just adding. So if I'm not displacing, if I keep producing the fossil-based, and on top of that, I'm adding CO2-based, you will get, environmentally speaking, a completely different picture, most likely a negative picture than if I really displace. And one question that is being discussed at the moment is, if we need displacement, what are the policy mechanisms? How are we actually going to monitor that we are displacing and not adding? The other things, two aspects that you need to take into account is the benefits of substitution will change over time. So if you are just substituting a system that is fossil-based, hopefully by 2040, a lot of the fossil-based will have now changed, and there the benefit of substitution decreases. That's normal, that's not a problem, that's actually where we want to go, but it needs to be taken into account. And the third point is that substitution is not inherently permanent. We have seen it with biofuels. So you need, and we need together to design mechanisms and think how the policies are implemented in a way that if the system shifts, that then you take out, for instance, a subsidy and the system doesn't go back to where it was before, because actually that will be not, I think, the more sustainable way to actually shift the whole system. The fourth point, and I only have 5, so don't worry, I'm not gonna go over, you know, number 20, but the number 4 is I love the discussion about CO2 utilization and negativity and neutrality are coming back to the issue of permanence. So removals are defined by the permanence. So how long do I need to take the CO2 out of the atmosphere? That's temporal storage, taking the CO2 away for 5 years or for 10 years or for 20 years. Would that be helpful? How long is long enough? And that is a discussion that is going back and forward. And of course, we know that there are products with a really short storage time. A typical one, for instance, urea. If you put urea in the soil, which is a fertilizer, the CO2 will leave the soil within a week. But if you have a plastic in a car, or you have a steel, or you have a building, then the lifetime is much larger than weeks. So it depends on the product that you are speaking. And a lot of the discussion that we have seen here is around, can we then have circular economy? Having the products going more than one cycle, extending the life cycle, how can we account about that? Will that be helpful? And the main critical question maybe that we need to take into account is how then, if that is how we can permanence, how do we actually secure that that happens? And how do we monitor where the carbon is? Because you will need to keep custody of the carbon through the different cycles in order to actually claim benefits of circular economy. And what I put down is just a reference of the amount of, people, the fact that you can actually recycle something doesn't mean that it happens. And we have seen it with plastic, where only 9% of all plastic produced between 1950 and 2050 have been recycled accumulatively in history, and of this only 10%, so 10% of the 9% has been recycled more than once. So we need to do much better than these numbers if we are going to use this as an issue of permanent storage. On contrast, if you look at the steel, almost 100% is recycled. So it depends on the product that you are producing, but it's not as easy as just say circularity will solve it. And something that people need to understand, and I hope maybe you already know, is that there is no correlation between the time horizon and the atmospheric lifetime of CO2. Because if you look at how long that CO2 stays in the atmosphere, it is not one number. According to the IPCC, around 50% of the CO2 is removed within a century, but there is around 20% that stays there for many millennia. So when we speak about global warming potential of 100%, that is not because that is the lifetime of CO2. There has been an agreement among politicians and scientists to take that line. And you can see this when we look at the permanence of carbon in different kind of regulations. So you get UNFCCC and the past 2050, they say permanent carbon is stored more than 100 years. If you look at the product environmental footprint, 300 years, international reference line, more than 10,000 years, life cycle assessment use 50, 100, 20 years, but the 100 years is the most common. But there is no one number. It's not scientifically 100, and that's it. On the question of whether there are benefits of temporal mitigation, so whether delaying the radioactive forcing of just putting CO2 into the atmosphere, just having it there for 10 years or 15 years, that's not a life cycle assessment problem. We know how to count that. The problem is, I think, and that will be my point here, it is on how much you value short-term impacts versus long-term impacts. So if you have a really shorter time horizon, you decide that 20 years is long ago, you are valuing short-term impacts more than long-term impacts. If you do the longer the time horizon, the less value temporal storage has. And this is not an LCA problem, this is a value choice. And that's a discussion that needs to happen in that environment, for which a life cycle assessment then can provide a proper methodology to count. And my final message to you is, unfortunately, there is no one unique answer to the question of environmental performance of CCU. It is not that we can say it's always good, they can say it's always bad. We do know, however, a couple of things. We know that the system boundaries matter, so therefore the broader the system boundaries, the better to understand the impact. We know that the longer the CO2 is out of the atmosphere, the better. That without decreasing the importance of avoidance, we just know that if it can be longer, better. If you were to do impact in terms of climate change, the market size matters. The larger the market size, the more that can have an impact actually in our climate change targets. The source of the CO2 matters, so whether it's air, fossil, bio, geo, and that is not because the CO2 behaves differently in the atmosphere, that's not the case, but it matters in terms of whether we are or not closing cycles. The source and the amount of energy for the CO2 capture and the utilization process matters a lot. So we have seen again and again in life cycle assessment of CO2 utilization that where the electricity, the carbon footprint of the electricity, the carbon footprint of hydrogen, the carbon footprint of heat, how do I capture the CO2 determines in large part the footprint of the CO2 product. So no free lunches, we need really to understand where is that energy coming from in order to understand whether the CO2 utilization route is producing more or less emissions. And displacement is not a given. So we need to really try to understand, are we replacing, are we adding? What are we replacing? When are we replacing? And how are we monitoring that? If we just allow and think the market is gonna do that and we don't need to take care of it, we are in high risk of actually going into adding instead of replacing over the short term at least. And that will be against what we are actually trying to do, that is move toward hopefully a less CO2 intensive economy. And that is it from my side, hopefully within time, because I don't see a time, I don't see a chat, so I'm just gonna stop.
Thank you, Andrea.
I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you very much for this very nice presentation. So you will stay online for the Q&A afterwards.
Yes.
But thank you very much for now. Just for your information, so if you want to ask questions already, or if you have boiling questions, you can ask them on our social media, or on our LinkedIn, or on a Twitter. You see the QR code here. We have made messages where you can just add your comments and questions. So now I will give the floor to Professor Katrien Arning from Ansbach University of Applied Sciences, and she will speak about the social acceptance and policy acceptance around CCU.
Thank you very much for your introduction. Where do I find? Let me have a short. Yeah, here is the light. Okay, thank you and a warm welcome to everybody. My name is Katrien Arning and I'm a psychologist. I'm right now working at Ansbach University and my research focus is on the human side of those technical innovations, on risk perceptions, on acceptance, and of course on communication, which is required. And yeah, let's start. I think the mission is clear, act now. And we've heard a lot about potential applications of the CCU technology. And yeah, I want to look with you on the social response to this new set of technologies. And when we look into history and the recent past, we know that technical innovations are not always welcome, at least at the beginning. So yeah, let's go back to the introduction of the railway. People were afraid that this might cause delirium furiosum, or that using a telephone would attract lightning strikes. I can see some smiles in your faces, yeah. Today, this sounds funny, but we do not know a lot about the reactions of people when we come to CCU technologies. This is a set of technology which does not bring personal benefits like comfort or wealth or something. Okay, they bring benefits like mitigating climate change, but this is nothing you can immediately feel and perceive. So this is why it is important to look at acceptance issues, because we know from other energy transition technologies that people are sometimes a bit reluctant in their reaction, especially when they do not really understand the technology, or they feel like it demands changes in their lifestyle, in their environment. Yeah, just think about, there was a wind park erected in your neighborhood, or there was a biogas plant in your neighborhood. So this is why we also have to include the social response to CCU into our development activities. And yeah, first of all, I think it's important to know what acceptance is, because the rest of the talk will be about acceptance. And for me, as a social scientist, first of all, it's a complex issue. Acceptance is a concept which has many different phases or facets. And for me, this is really, really fascinating, this complexity. For a lot of engineers or policymakers, this is not really welcome, because I do not have an easy answer to give you, but I hope I can, transport some of my fascination for this issue to you. So first of all, when we look at acceptance, we have socio-political acceptance, which means, yes, I'm accepting this concept of CCU, and well, I'm supporting it, or yes, I'm giving a vote to a party which supports CCU technology rollout. But on the other hand, we have another acceptance level. This is local acceptance, and you all know it. It's on the level of, let's say, local protest against the deployment, against the infrastructure rollout. And in the end, we also have a market or product acceptance for CO2 derived products. And this ranges from mattresses to fuels to chemical components and so on and so on. And coming from this complexity of acceptance to a bit more background, it's a construct which is not directly measurable. It's based on an individual evaluation. So it's highly individual and highly subjective. And it depends on your experience, on your knowledge, on your capabilities, on your background, etc. And acceptance is highly volatile. So once you have achieved it, you cannot say, great, I take it for granted until the upcoming years. It changes depending on context factors. And these are technology-related factors. For example, competing technologies, other green alternatives, they affect the acceptance of CCU, or the political climate and environment. And I think the last few weeks have showed us that the issue of energy dependency has come to a complete new perception. And I think this already trickles down into private households who start to save energy, who start to think about, let's say, cutoffs in their personal living comfort, because the changing political situation has brought up this to the topic. Economic issues also play a role, how specific subsidies are given to a specific technology, and of all social factors, like, as I already said, factors like socio-demographic issues, if I'm experienced with the technology, and my attitudes, if I'm like a risk taker, or if I like innovations or not. And as another factor, how the media is covering this issue. And all these factors affect technology acceptance. And if I try to measure it, I have to look at this whole scope to find out, okay, which one is affecting this specific acceptance I'm measuring right now. So I really need a validated measurement framework. So, okay, I can ignore this message. So after this background, and I promise you this is enough of acceptance concept background, I want to look with you on what we already know about perceptions and acceptance of CCU in the public. And first of all, CCU is largely unknown to the public. What you can see here are different levels of knowledge regarding the CCU technology, CCU products, and some steps of the CCU process chain. And the darker the blue, the more knowledge people report to have about this issue. And what we find here is that only 20 to 25% of people have heard about the CCU technology or about CO2 derived products, and only about 10% report to be well informed. And this is not unusual for innovative technologies. This is a pattern we find for every sustainable technology innovation. People do not know much about it. But this has severe consequences, because people, when they are asked, how do you like this technology or this development, they do not really know much about it. They build their own mental models. They have their own assumptions about how this technology works, and they might be wrong from an expert's point of view. From an individual point of view, they make perfect sense because they explain how the world works. And we will see some inadequate, this is the term I prefer, mental models later on. So if I have an inadequate mental model, for example, I'm afraid that the CO2 might evade from my plastic product while I'm using it, then I might overestimate the risks which might evade from this product. And this is typical for opinions I'm asking for when I'm doing research or when I'm a market research company. People develop pseudo opinions, which are not meaningful, which are not stable. And this is something difficult to deliver my strategy. So nevertheless, if we give people well-designed scenarios and information, it is possible to measure acceptance. And what we know so far is that the acceptance level for CCU is quite positive. So this is another axis here. The higher the value, the more the acceptance. And what we found, the general idea of CCU is well liked in the public. And this picture changes a bit when we ask for local acceptance. So would you welcome some infrastructure rollout in your village, at home, right at your garden fence? And when we ask people about greenfield technology infrastructure deployment, then even 40% would say, oh, I would react with protest. So when we look at local acceptance, the picture is not that positive. But these are, acceptance judgments, which are, let's say there's also a percentage value, nice to report, but we do not really know what people base their judgment on. And this is why we look at these gray bars. We also have to dig deeper and have to find out what are the motives people base their judgment on. And these are risk and benefit perceptions. And this is the next part I want you to look at with me, at the kind of benefit and risk perception. And we capture them while leading interviews with different stakeholders on CCU technology, with experts, and especially with lay people. And what you will see later on is like a big summary, because those risk and benefit perceptions differ with regard to the product we ask, with regard for example, the CO2 source we are asking for. But I think for a first impression, this gives you some ideas about what people think about. First of all, we look at the left-hand green side, the benefits people perceive. First of all, environmental benefits. This is really good. They have understood the idea of CO2 emission savings. And if you tell them that it's possible to substitute fossil resources, they also really like the idea, but they do not know it without telling them. They also like the idea of a more sustainable production. And this is something, it's difficult to read. They also expect some kind of product innovation, like improved product characteristics, because it's a somehow new kind of producing products. So if it's possible to load a product or to improve a product, do it, because people welcome this. On the other hand, there are also risk perceptions. And first of all, it's on, let's say, directed on sustainability concerns. People are not really convinced that CCU is a sustainable technology. They say CO2 is only stored for a short time. They say, we are not really sure if this is a pretext for dirty industries to continue burning fossil resources. What they also mention is that they are afraid that CCU investments might cannibalize green investments in other greener technologies. So these sustainability concerns should be taken seriously. And I heard a lot of messages today where I could tailor my messages regarding those issues. So other factors were like health risks based on this inadequate mental model, that people are really afraid that this toxic CO2, they perceive CO2 as being toxic, that CO2 might do some harm to them. And they also perceive environmental risks, like maybe additional toxic effects due to new production routines. So as a next step, I want to show you how those benefit and risk perceptions, which can be measured and modeled to predict acceptance. Of course, when we want to look at acceptance of a technology concept or a local infrastructure rollout, there are a lot of more factors which are relevant. For example, participating the communities in the process, the fairness, etc. pp. But today I want to focus on this issue of perceptions. And what we found here in the explanation of general acceptance of this concept is that the environmental benefits are the main drivers of a positive gut feeling about it, leading to a positive acceptance, a general acceptance of this CCU technology concept. So as a message, you need to communicate the environmental benefits in a comprehensive way. Then this is the most, let's say, promising way to work on general acceptance. On the other hand, when we look at the prediction of local acceptance, here we can see, I will leave out this individual factor, that the sustainability risks and the environmental health risks are the main barriers to the local acceptance of CCU infrastructure, leading to feelings of dread and fear, affective risk perceptions. And yeah, you need to be fascinated by statistics as well, but I will translate this arrow. This arrow means that the higher my risk perceptions are, the lower my benefit perceptions will be. So this is called effect heuristic. My risk perception like colors the perception of benefits. And this effect heuristic, which is a natural evolutionary response, when I feel afraid of CCU, I will never, ever accept it. And also my benefit perceptions will diminish. So let's come to an end. This was a short, brief dive into statistics and modeling to show you how those perceptions are important, and it can give us the background in understanding how the acceptance response evolves. So let's come to my summary. First of all, we find positive social political acceptance levels. So people generally like the idea of reusing CO2 to convert it into valuable products, which is a good starting point. But it's too early to say, yoo-hoo, hooray, let's go. There are some issues to consider. So first of all, the low awareness and knowledge about CCU in the public. And this might lead to the fact that people have irrational or technically wrong assumptions. Second, you should know and be aware of acceptance hotspots. I like to compare them with tipping points where a positive acceptance response can change into a negative rejective reaction, especially in those people who have not made up their opinion yet. And issues referring to those acceptance hotspots are, first of all, the question, where do we roll out our infrastructure? On a green field or on a brown field? What are the consequences on the local community level? Second, sustainability concerns. Again, people think when we explain the CCU concept, they say, okay, it's greenwashing, it's only temporary storage, and maybe there is a better solution, and CCU cannibalizes investments. So here, explanations are needed for the public. We need to address health and environmental concerns. And I think every expert here in this round was like, those stupid people, they do not know nothing about chemistry, but the majority of people does not know anything about chemistry, including me. So it's important to take these concerns seriously. And there are a lot of trust building measures you could impose in order to counteract those wrong assumptions. And finally, I have two messages. There is only one printed there. The first is we need a constant monitoring of societal responses to this technology during its development, during its rollout. And these insights need to inform technical development about accepted development pathways and about potential hotspots that might like set no-goes for the public. And we need CCU communication and dialogue, which is timely, transparent, balanced in a way that it mentions benefits, but also risks, and trustful. And yes, I think these are my main messages. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I think it was a very inspiring talk, and it makes us also think about how to communicate about CCU and the key message that we have to communicate honestly and based on also on the science. That's very important. So now, before we have the Q&A, I will ask Professor Volker Sick from Michigan University, and who is also the director of the Global CO2 Initiative in the US, to in fact conclude this event and give a bit his perspectives. Volker.
Thank you, Silvia. So someone always has to be the last speaker before the end of an event and the real festivities. But in short, I will give the whole set of presentations that you heard this afternoon again, right? Because it's been a long and very productive afternoon that that has started with the overview given by Celia on CCU is an integrated element of what the IPCC report's response is to how we deal with all the challenges to meet the 1.5 degree scenario. And so the range of opportunities that, that are open up. And then we dove into details that looked at what are actually the opportunities and the risks of various product categories, various technology systems, where Deepak first gave us a sense of what the chemical industry's potential is. What kind of products can be made? How is this all being a part of a strategy to get products that we have enjoyed using and continue to need? So it really is a situation where a lot of potential exists, but very few opportunities are actually in place. Right? So we have answers, but they need to actually be materialized. And that became very, very clear in Jan's talk about energy systems and the relevance of CCU in those. We do, of course, have a well-established infrastructure for energy management, use, distribution, etc. How if we now replace the origin of some of the key feedstocks, let's say methane, with methane produced through CCU or hydrogen? A lot of implications. How do we handle transportation needs? How do we scale up? Let's not forget, it's 2022. There is not much time left to actually get all of that done. So that is really, really critical. And then in a moment of despair that I felt like, oh yeah, we have a lot of stuff to do, Paula came on stage and said, well, in the building sector, it actually looks quite different. There's a lot of stuff actually happening that is at technology readiness level 9, meaning it's on the market and ready for use. But of course, if we look at it closely, still a good handful of players that are in that space to materialize the gigaton potential that we have and the use case that we need to have. There's a lot of opportunity to accelerate. And there we take advantage of the fact that construction materials are produced in a distributed manner. So we can be really smart about how we harvest CO2, waste products, put them together and make useful elements. And I think Angela's presentation then showed us in very nice detail that while we know a lot about the chemistries, it actually is really complex to make this all work. Right? And there's a lot of need for a very careful planning
that we need to go through to decide what makes sense at what time and at what scale. How do we source the carbon that we need? Is it from CO2, or is it from CO2 harvested by plants and then converted into chemicals? There are a lot of system level questions. All of these are big system level questions. And then we heard a great introduction for all those of us who have not been thinking carefully about, well, how do we actually measure the CO2 footprint of all these products? Whoops. And how do we properly account so that especially decision makers know, should I engage in CCU or not? When does it make sense? Because let's face it, just because we use CO2 doesn't make it environmentally good. In fact, we can make things much worse. So that is especially interesting and important as we look at how do we actually make these solutions palatable, not only to investors and industry and politicians, but to societies at large. And we heard from Katrin in how important it is to continuously monitor and engage with society to inform what CCU actually is, what it can and cannot do. And as a result, we have heard this afternoon about many aspects. I think we can be encouraged that the potential of CO2 utilization to help mitigate climate change effects is huge. But there are also a lot of things that we have not yet in place. And those include what does the everyday consumer make about it? Does it make a difference if the CO2 in my beer comes from a coal-fired power plant, from the air, or who knows where from? Who actually knew? So a big question, as big as the movie Quo Vadis, is where do we go from here? How do we make that happen? Again, I cannot emphasize enough that this is a colossal effort that we have to undergo. We cannot make mistakes. We have no time for learning curves. This is unprecedented, even in the context of huge projects like the Manhattan Project or the Apollo program. So it really requires all of us as a community, as we've seen today, to join forces. And I want to also say, even though climate change is sort of the focus of today's meeting and how we deal with it, I haven't heard this afternoon that, I mean, of course it was implied, but we have a lot of carbon-based products that we cannot substitute. We have to have them made with carbon. We just have to be smarter where the carbon comes from and how it is being used. And in the IPCC reports, this quote actually is taken from there, says that while of course a lot of biogenic carbon could be used, we don't have enough land to produce it. So we need alternatives. And even though Andrea has pointed to us providing an update to this study that she has also quoted, that is still about 2 months away. But we are excited to soon talk about sort of what is, in our opinion, the market evolution for CO2-based products. Because as you see this table here, the volume and the monetization value is enormous. And that's a key driver, right? So we're not talking about something that's kind of nice to do, but it doesn't move the needle. Well, it moves the needle in many different aspects. We've seen that table before, also taken from the IPCC report, highlighting that the projected CO2 utilization potential for 2030, 8 years from now, is only in the low gigaton range. But given where it's now, which is more or less close to zero, that's enormous. 8 years is on the order of the time frame that it takes to bring a new technology from technology readiness to market deployment. We have a long way to go in only 8 years. And speed matters. Again, taken from the IPCC report, the longer we wait to get started, the harder it gets, and the less the actual impact will be. So it's really a call to action to everyone. And therefore, what do we need? Well, of course, coming from academia, the first thing we would say, research, right? Not enough, right? We need facilities, hubs. We've heard about all these things. We need the policies to support it. And let's not forget also the brain power, the workforce to actually make all of that go, right? This is a famous curve to illustrate the value of death. Right? One of my friends told me, if you folks in academia think you're ready, you're done with it, we don't even consider it ready for prime time in industry. How can we make sure that this gap is being filled? We can't leave it to the natural academic life cycle, right? That's about 3 to 4 times too long. So let's roll up our sleeves, all of us, starting from young kids to all of us active, and make this work. I want to keep this short so we can have time for discussion and questions. And I thank you all for being here. Give it back to Signe.
Thank you very much, Volker, for this very interesting conclusion, and very inspiring as well. I propose that you can come on stage with Catherine, and we will get also Andrea, Professor Andrea Ramirez, on the screen. Maybe we can put the QR code again to remind people where to go if they want to ask questions. But I will first start with maybe questions from the audience here. So do you have any question from our panelists? Just wait for the microphone so the people online can also hear you.
Thank you.
I think it's open.
Sorry, I'm from Lansat XNG. I come from steel industry and lime industry background. I've gone through that phase actually where we were struggling to really find the right fit basically for decarbonization. There are 3 major choices: CCS, CCU, or hydrogen. So I think industry leaders probably will accept that industry leaders are confused at which direction they should be going for in future, because if they are going to invest in one technology, that's not for 1 year or 2 years or so, it's not short term, it's a long-term investment. And there is probably lack of public knowledge, even to the industry leaders, those who are running the industry, they still do not know that what is the right path for them to go and invest in a particular technology. They're all confused about, if you go into CCU, what is the scope 3 emission impact? If you go into CCS, is it going to be publicly accepted? If it is going to be hydrogen, is it going to be available tomorrow? Can we really commercially sort of amplify that thing? I think that question has to be answered by someone. We have to educate to the industry leaders. So I don't know what's your take, particularly from societal point of view. I mean, how do we really get into that society of the decision makers to really convince them that what is the right technology? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very comprehensive question. Catherine, you have the hard task to start.
Yeah. This is a really good answer, because it is the broad scope the world needs to know, not only, let's say investors, but also I think policymakers and as well as you pointed out, the public. So I can just answer it from the public acceptance side. People are posing similar questions, and what they can do is referring to the things they know, the past, for example, CCS, what already happened. And right now, I would say, if you try to launch a CCS project, don't do it. People won't accept it. So CCU, from a public acceptance point of view, has a higher potential because it's, let's say not burned yet. But nevertheless, as I pointed out, there are some tipping points as well, and you need to do it well if you want to go this way. And it should be, let's say, socially licensed. Regarding hydrogen, I would say it's comparable. So here again, you need to know about the barriers people perceive, and here it's again, it's not the technical way of seeing it. They are afraid that everything might explode because hydrogen is tending to explode everything you think about it. No, I'm not making fun of it, but I'm trying to break it down to make the social response understandable. But again, as a investor or a policymaker, you should not take this social response as a final response. As I said, this is highly volatile, and if you do it right, and if you inform right, and if you really lead a dialogue, not like filling knowledge gaps, feel a dialogue, because the public is interested in energy security, in affordable mobility, in affordable energy, then it will be possible to go this way. And I say not convince them, but to go this way together. Yeah. So Volker, would you add?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that as well, and pose the question of what do we need to achieve? Right? We need to achieve our needs. And what are those needs? We need to address climate change. We need to satisfy our need and desire for carbon-based products. And we need to satisfy our needs for energy. So if I look at the first two, maybe even including the third, CCU, in my opinion, presents a very attractive opportunity because it creates value, not only in providing the services and products, but also I can make money with it. Whereas CCS costs society money. So the last thing I would do is CCS. I think of CCS as part of a 2 timescale issue, in that we need to do a lot of it now, soon, to draw down the CO2 from the atmosphere, but then it can subside or even go away because we can take care of the residual CO2 emissions with making, for example, building materials. And therefore, unfortunately, I think my answer to your very important question is bringing us to Andreas' 3-dimensional world. Right, wrong, it depends. It locally depends on needs and opportunities. And I think Andrea will probably speak in the same way.
Yeah.
Thank you, Volker. Andrea, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, so I agree. It depends is the most unsatisfying answer for a lot of policymakers. I keep saying it depends, but it does depend. But a couple of aspects, I see I have a more nuanced view of CCS than maybe my other panelists have, just because there's large amount of CO2. I don't think there is a competition. What we have seen is a lot of the CCU or CCS will feed in each other. The carbon capture part will be needed. The need for negative emissions will require storage. There are sequestration projects that are starting next year in Germany, so the situation is changing. So I will not draw completely in the Netherlands as well. I think it changes as the need changes, but we do need products that need carbon, and that remains there. Those products, to be environmentally sound, require low carbon energy. Therefore, it comes the second system condition, and you need to involve society. So what is the right technology? Unfortunately, there is not the right, there are right technology for right context. And it depends a lot. I think at this moment, the situation as it is today regarding energy security is quite different of what we saw 2 months ago. And that changed the perception on that as well. So I do think having a broader view, understanding the role of different technologies and understanding the trade-offs, and then daring to make a decision. I think my personal view is that we are waiting for having the win-win situation where nobody loses and there are no risks. And if we wait for no risks and somebody win, everyone winning, we are not going to move forward. I think we need to have people who risk it. And we need to figure out policy-wise how to actually motivate that risk-taking to take place. Because once you begin to do it at the scale, it will be easier for the second person, and we can build the infrastructure, and then we can have the third person. But everyone is kind of waiting for somebody to do it, and the clock is ticking. it's going to be difficult, but definitely we need to take trade-offs. Things that we don't name today, critical raw materials, water and land, will play a decision on which technologies are going to be used where. A little bit more than we think, I think, especially water.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Is there any other questions from the audience? Yes, please, Deepak.
Thank you, Deepak from Vito. Question is for Catherine. First of all, thanks for the very nice presentation. The numbers that you showed, just saying something like 59% positive, where does the data come from? Is it European public, global public? And then there is a follow-up question. Are there reasons in the world where the public perception is more positive compared to other reasons which less positive? And finally, could that be an added incentive for the companies, apart from logistics and energy sources, that more public acceptance to install their plants there? Thanks.
This is an interesting question. Yeah, let's start with the first part. So this was empirical data based on a survey we run in Germany in 2 years ago. And the business, it takes a bit of time until you get it published. But in the last year, we also run it in a European context. But this model was replicated, but is not published yet. So I couldn't show it. But the, let's say, basic ways of functioning in this model, they were proved again. And also the impact of individual factors. This is something I left out. The perceived controllability of risks is an important factor. If I think the technology is controllable in terms of environmental effects and so on, then I see it in a much more positive light. And this is something I think CCS and hydrogen have to prove to people that this is like controllable. Sorry, I forgot the second question.
Reasons in the world there to find, or in Europe, because your study was in Europe. So are there reasons you found the more positive than negative?
Yeah, the issue is this is so highly region and context specific, because here we asked for CCU technology infrastructure in terms of fuel refineries. And if you take this finding and want to transfer it, for example, to what did we see in the previous talks about, like a cement factory, or let's say let's take it to a DAC plant where the CO2 needs to be transported. So we have many different elements and factors contributing to our whole technology scenario, and they are all evaluated differently. This is why I cannot tell you on a broad European scope. So this is the region where people are the most favorable, and this is the region where they are the less favorable. What we find in total, like universal reactions, are that health and environmental risks are the main barriers. And this is, again, a quite evolutionary response. And if we open this black box of acceptance, let's say this 59 or 84%, this was the proportion of explained variance in how much of acceptance we were able to predict. Then again, even if we find a 90% area, we need to open this box and to find out what are the specific motives of the people giving us this answer. And this is a quite unsatisfying answer for someone who wants to do investment decisions, I know. But for someone who is doing a concrete deployment activity, this is really useful, because he or she knows what to address and how to take people on board. And final answer, this, because I saw it was on LinkedIn, another question, how to decide which sustainable or renewable energy technology is the best or the most favored. I cannot answer it yet, because again, it's difficult to compare, but I would know how to do it, and we need to redo it, because this Ukraine war has really changed a lot. And to be honest, I think it has changed more than this IPCC report, which has the same drastic impact on our mankind. But regarding social acceptance, I would say that the starting point is to get into a discussion and to pursue and to promote this is much more positive right now, because people like acknowledge the necessity to react and work on this issue.
Thank you very much, Catherine. We don't have a lot of time, so I will take maybe one more question for Andrea or for Volker. You have a question, so Anastasios?
For Andrea, good afternoon. It's a question that has been troubling us quite some time. It's in the context of carbon removals and mainly the origin of the CO2. And the IPCC is quite clear that we can claim removals when we're talking about atmospheric CO2 into storage or into mineralization, or when we're talking about biogenic CO2. The question is, does unavoidable CO2 from industrial activities have a place in this discussion of carbon removals, or is it by default additional? I'm not talking about energy-related CO2, but chemistry-related CO2. So if we keep on using limestone, lime, for example, because or cement, because we find it a product that is difficult to replace nowadays, can this be considered defined as unavailable, and then have also a place in the discussion of the removals, because it will in any case go into the atmosphere? So why wait until it goes into the atmosphere and do direct air capture and not capture it directly from the stack?
Thank you, Anastasia, for just a small thing. There is another event afterwards, so we need to be very quick. So Andrea, if you manage to say you answer really in 1 minute, we'll be
I would say there is a place for that, but that is being discussed in the concept of offsetting. So offsetting is you know, you have unavailable CO2 going into the atmosphere, and then you have an activity like direct air capture, reforestation, mineralization, land change, to offset that, to take you to zero, and you can go beyond offsetting to get negativity. So offsetting is being discussed, but it's not a net removal, but it just allows you to compensate, and offsetting only makes sense for the unavoidable emissions. If everyone begins to offset before decreasing, we are going nowhere. You need to decrease as much as possible, then you will have an amount of CO2 that you cannot decrease with the technology we have today, economically feasible. You will need to offset that using negative emission technologies. It doesn't mean that you go to negativity, but it does mean that you arrive to zero. So there is a place, and I have seen a lot of discussion on voluntary carbon mechanisms around offsetting, and the Commission is also working on that. But it's offsetting, it's a mitigation, it's not negativity.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and thank you very much to Volker and Catherine, to all the speakers of today. So big applause to everyone. It was very pleasant to be in front of you all today, and for those who can stay a bit, we might go for a drink next door, so just feel free to continue the discussion with us. And I wish all the followers online a very nice evening, and do not hesitate to continue commenting on LinkedIn. We will have a look at it and answer it.
Can you turn the camera so we can see the audience?
Oh, wait a sec. Can you do that? Just you can see the audience.
Oh, cool. I don't see anyone. Great.